This week I'm with the disciples in the post-resurrection appearances, and I'm going to read a longer than usual passage because it's so full of meaning from John 21 and beginning at verse 1 through to 19. Afterward, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, also known as Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two other disciples were together. "I'm going out to fish," Peter told them. And they said, "We'll go with you." So they went out and got in the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, "Friends, haven't you any fish?" "No," they answered. He said, "Throw your net on the right side of the boat and you'll find some." When they did, they were unable to haul the net because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It's the Lord." As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, "It is the Lord," he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he'd taken it off, and jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from the shore, about 100 yards. When they landed, they saw a fire burning coals on it, with the fish on it and some bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish you've just caught." So Simon Peter climbed back into the boat and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153, but even with so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." None of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took bread and gave it to them and did the same with the fish. This was now the third time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they'd finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said, "you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep. Very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and you went where you wanted. But when you're old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go." Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, "Follow me." Jesus appeared again. It's interesting, right at the beginning of the ministry of Jesus, it was about calling and following. And so we read in verse 1 in this passage here that Jesus appeared again. It was not all the disciples. You notice that there's a list there. It was a group of disciples, but they weren't all even named. But that group were an important group, for they went out fishing. It was returning to what they felt they knew best. This is what they did. They fished, and so they returned to what perhaps was their skill base, the thing that mattered most to them. It was a night of despondency. That's when people fish. They fished at night, and it was very much a night of despondency for professional fishermen, because we're told very clearly these words are very powerful when we read them in this gospel. "I'm going to fish. We'll go with you." But that night they caught nothing. We can only begin to understand what that must have meant for Peter in particular. Jesus understands their sense of sadness. And that's why it tells us quite clearly, "Friends, haven't you any fish?" No. But Jesus gave them a solution to their problem, to their dilemma. We're told that they're to do something particular. "Throw out your net on the right side of the boat and you'll find some there." However, he's giving them far more than just a catch of fish, because it's the recognition of who he is and the change and the difference that will actually make to them. We heard earlier from my guest how one of their retreats is going to be about butterflies' wings, about the transformation that comes in the totality of new life. And when these group of disciples knew it was Jesus. For Peter in particular, it's going to the beginning of a whole transformation in his life. The second half of this extended reading shows Jesus reinstating Peter after his denial as a leader. There were 3 denials and there are 3 affirmations. And we're told quite clearly those affirmations are to ministry, to calling, to being one who will help them to catch fish and love those who are being called by him. There's a real sense of taking care of these sheep. And in verse 19, it comes to a climax really. Then he said to him, "Follow me." It was by this lake that Jesus had first spoken to those disciples and called them to follow me. But now the same thing happens at the end, but it isn't really the end. It's the beginning of a whole new ministry. And Peter is certainly reinstated. He must have felt a bit frustrated that he kept being asked the same kind of question. Do you love me? But it was so important for Peter to understand that he did love him. And that not only did he love him, he would follow. And of course, he would become the great leader of the Christian community. But this reinstatement is so very, very important if he's going to be effective and used by God. Remember that word that's spoken very clearly at the end of this passage, follow me.